Mhm.
Greetings and welcome to Mount Olympus. I am Hercules Invictus, and today I am proud to bring you Living Theurgy. We have with us our esteemed theurgist, Apollonius. Greetings, Apollonius.
Greetings.
Clio Ajana. Greetings, Clio.
Greetings.
I read part of the review that Tony wrote of your book, and you always have so many things that you're doing, so many projects that you're doing. And I thought before we begin with tonight's topic, if you could share with us a little bit about this book and any other book we can expect, I'm sure, in the weeks ahead.
Okay. Well, the book that Tony reviewed, it's called Pythagorean Theology and the Esoteric Elements, and it's actually it brings together I guess 9 or 10 articles that I wrote back in the 1990s. They were published individually in Circle Network News or Circle
Mhm.
Magazine, whatever it was at that time. And but they're all interrelated. They're basically doing, sort of a Pythagorean perspective on the deities, on theurgy, and on the elements and how the elements relate to various deities and various systems of deities, especially as we find them in Orphism and the Eleusinian mysteries and other things like
Wow.
that. So it's an attempt to draw together a lot of scholarly work uh, that's been done on the origins of some of these traditions. Um, People like Martin West and some others, Peter Kingsley, um, and and trying to make sort of a synthetic whole out of it. So, filling in with some intuition or some insights of my own, where I thought it was appropriate. And so, like I said, this stuff it was mostly written back in the 1990s. And so what I did was I pulled it all together into one book. I've It's maybe 250 pages, something like that. Um, and and self-published it just so it'd be available to people. And so that's it. So again, it sounds like I churn out these books quickly, but it's mostly
Yes.
taking material that I wrote already and either republishing it or publishing it for the first time with some editing and updating and stuff like that. So that's has been out, I don't know, for a month, I suppose, or maybe a little more. I've got another project. It's sort of off the wall, but I have developed a new divination system basically, and so I've got a book on that just about finished, and that one was written from scratch. So so
Oh,
that one
awesome.
that's what I've been working on the last couple of months.
Based on
So
any ancient system, or is it from a synthesis of other systems?
it's a synthesis. Well, it's based on a bunch of stuff. It's not so old. It's not. I can't claim any sort of really ancient pedigree for it. It was inspired by the alethiometer in Philip Pullman's his Dark Materials trilogy. I don't know if you're familiar with that or not, but it's a device. It's a part of the books, but it's this device. It's a divinatory device um, where it has some dials on it. It's called the Golden Compass, which gives the name to the first book out of the trilogy. And so you can set some dials indicating topics you're interested in to formulate a question. And it's all represented by 36 symbols. And so these symbols have very deep metaphorical and allegorical kinds of meanings. So you have to pick the right symbols to express the question, and then you go into kind of a meditative state, and there's another pointer that kind of swings around and dynamically points to other symbols that gives you your answer.
Oh, wow.
So I thought it's a really cool idea, and it's portrayed very nicely in the movies they've made out of the series too. Uh, and I thought, and I for years, ever since those books were first published, been thinking, I bet I could make one of these things, not exactly like the one in the book, but make something that worked on similar principles. And so I've been thinking about that. And so I finally decided to do something. It's not mechanical though, so but it's based on similar principles. So I have 36 categories, covers everything you could possibly think about. And this is based on a system that John Wilkins designed in 1658, if I remember the date correctly. He designed a philosophical language, which was supposed to be a new language in which the structure of the words actually gave you the definitions of the concepts. So you could look at a word that you'd never seen before, but you could sort of parse out the symbols in it and tell, to an approximation at least, what the word meant. And so it was built around this philosophical language and this very symbolic kind of notation for it. And then another idea was Leibniz designed a universal calculus, he called it, that again was supposed to be able to represent any kind of thought. And it was a kind of an early AI system. By manipulating numbers, you could do reasoning, you could do formal reasoning. So I took both of these ideas and I used them to make this structure of thought. So a kind of a tree of being of all possible things you can think about based on Wilkins' tree and using some ideas from Leibniz. And then I developed a procedure that, again, allows you to take, anywhere from one to practically maybe three or four different ideas that express what you want to ask about and in more or less detail, and then by an arithmetical procedure and rolling some dice, get a response, which then also can be interpreted in terms of these same things. So you can almost like put together a sentence expressing the topic you want to inquire about and get a simple sentence back as a response. So it's a little bit like the Lenormand Oracle decks too. Um, and but instead of having this nice sort of mechanical device, I do the calculations with a calculator or online. Um, but so you could do it by hand. It's not that hard. But um, um, if you're arithmetically challenged, you can use a calculator easily. So anyway, the book is mostly the catalog of these 36 different uh, broad genera. Uh, and within each one, there's anywhere from 6 to 10 subcategories, and each of the genera is illustrated by a hieroglyph, an appropriate hieroglyph. So it's kind of like the symbols on the alethiometer. Uh, and so you can and there's some tables and stuff to help you do this stuff. So you can formulate your question, go through based on the definitions of these different categories, go through this procedure and get your response and then interpret it. So I give you some examples of doing that. And so that's really what's occupied me the last couple months, and that's just about done now. I'm just trying to decide whether to put in another example or not, but it's actually already up on Amazon, ready to uh, publish.
That
Uh,
is incredible, and I would definitely like to play with that and then review it or do a show
oh,
on.
yeah, yeah.
That's incredible, and I'm not familiar with the work that inspired you, but it sounds like something that's presented as fiction. Am I correct in that?
Yes, it's a trilogy of books, and there's actually a second trilogy that's partially written now. But it's a very, very deep. I mean, it's a young adult, I think, is the way it's technically classified, but it's really a very deep set of books, and there's a lot of profound ideas in the books. So I would encourage you to read them.
Definitely will now. When I play this back, I'm going to write down all the information and then look on Amazon and some of the other places I look for books. I've always found I've spent many shows talking about this, that things that arise in the popular imagination, are part of our modern mythology.
Hmm.
I found great insight and wisdom in comic books occasionally, and in other forms of fiction. and you could see the old patterns, so the ancient patterns presented in a new way. Like I was tracking in a Marvel movie, they had it was in Thor: Love and Thunder, and they had a city where all the different pantheons of gods lived. And not that I liked the way that Zeus and the Greek pantheon were portrayed, but anyway, that's but that city has been popping up in a lot of different places, like a place that's a home to pantheons, and
Yeah.
pops up in theosophy with various concepts of the afterlife. It pops in like if you think past why there's so many Elysiums in the Greek material. You have the Glam Elysium, where there's like the National Enquirer, you have the Mystics Elysium, you have the Thrice a Good Person Elysium, and then, there might be some private Elysiums. You have Devachan, you have Devaloka, and these are all like a synthesis of different pantheons, and they have gods living together and governing each other. And then they have ways that the gods interact as a god with humanity. And again,
Mm.
it's popped up in enough places where watching it pop up has become like a hobby of mine. And it's old, obscure occult information, and it's evolving in some way, and it's making itself known in the popular imagination.
Mhm.
I find that phenomenally fascinating.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Definitely fascinated by what you're saying.
What I find interesting is that when you started talking about the device, and I was thinking, wait a minute, I remember this. That I believe the movie had Nicole Kidman in it, I think. Uh,
Yes, that was
and
the original movie, I believe.
the
Yeah.
original movie of it. And so it's interesting that you have that because you can, you see it and people have these sketches and things of what they think it is. It's got a huge fandom around it. I'm curious, was that something that you considered when you were putting this together as a system? Because I would think at this point, because the books have been around forever, so I'm just wondering why someone didn't already do that. Um,
Oh, well, in fact, I've got one. I can even within reach, I can show it to you. You can buy, replicas. Not, I would say
mhm.
non-functioning replicas, although this does have needles that you can set and move around. Um, and so yeah, so just the way they usually do with movies, you can there's whatever you call it, fan stuff, that you can buy. And um, but it's a toy basically, or an ornament. It's not working. But I like the concept of the alethiometer, and I thought that you could actually, based on the idea of the way you put in, what I liked about it was you set these parameters. You had these three dials that you used to formulate the question, and that it was all in terms of these 36 basic categories that you had to interpret, though, in a very imaginative and allegorical or metaphorical kind of way. And that was the real skill of operating the thing. I mean, anybody could see the symbols, but understanding what they meant in a given context, that was the difficult part. And that's where uh, Lyra, um, heroine of the story, had great skill. And some other people did too, but it was a pretty rare skill to be able to look at the symbols and then kind of go down deep, go into a trance really, but then also go down deep into the meanings of the symbols to extract out the relevant meaning for whatever the situation was. And I think the mechanism I've developed too, it does take some practice and insight of that type. Because again, these are very broad categories. You're dividing everything expressible into 36 categories. They have to be very broad. And so um, even if there's a way of getting more detailed information, but that like takes it down to just one other level. So you have to get skill in being able to read, you know, what is the relevant meaning in this context, and it may be a very symbolic or metaphorical kind of meaning. So like one example I give in the book, it's I'm just trying to remember now what the question was. But anyway, the answer basically was birds. So you have to think about, well, what does birds have to do with this question? I wish I could remember what the question was now. But the way I interpreted it was, you have to think about all of the kind of folk sayings about birds. You know, birds of a feather flock together. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. That was one of the relevant meanings. I forget what else, but you see, you have to sort of think of it that way. What could birds have to do with this particular question that I'm asking? And then find the relevant meaning. So it's also like the alethiometer and that, and I kind of like that. I kind of like the fact that, it's not just giving you a simple kind of answer, yes, no, something like that. It's more like tarot, that it takes some interpretation of the symbols to be able to pull out the meaning. And that's what engages your imagination. And based on my understanding of the way divination works, really sort of the Neoplatonic understanding, is you're getting information from the gods via your imagination. And so you need to activate your imagination in order to be able to read it correctly. And so yeah, I don't I don't know if anyone's actually tried to make an alethiometer that is more literally like the kind in the book and it works that way. I would certainly be interested to see if anyone had, but I haven't seen that in what little online searching I've done.
I mean, I just think it's fascinating because the original concept of the books and then of the movie um, deals with things on the surface, but also very deep underneath. And I think that that's really what divination at its core asks of you. When you said about, to speak through the imagination, that means you have to see, okay, this is what I think is a literal understanding, but underneath there's probably two or three or more layers
Yeah.
of understanding. So I think you're onto something. This is fantastic. Now, when are you clicking the button for Amazon to make this go live, come
Well,
alive yet?
I could do it any day. Like I said, I'm really trying to decide whether to put in one more example because I realized all my examples have only one response genus as the output, and I want one with two or more response genuses, which means you can get kind of a sentence, like a subject and a predicate as part of the response. So I've just got to think of a good question to pose to it and get a response that I can use as an example. Um, but yeah, I mean, I could literally click it now, but because I've got a cover designed for it and everything. But I just want to decide whether to put in one more example, and I should probably proofread it yet one more time. You can never proofread enough.
You mean for those funny typos?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That is awesome, and it looks like we're going to spend time talking about popular culture and spirituality tonight, which is great by me. Cleo, how about what's new and exciting with you? What projects have you completed? Which ones are you working on, and we can look forward to soon?
Well, we're still doing things for the project we have together, which I don't know when that's coming out actually at this point. Sometime in 2024, I'm guessing. Um,
Guessing too.
and otherwise, actually, what I'm working on right now is a project that's addressing cronehood. So that's where my research and writing is going right now.
I'm sorry, I missed the word. What'd you say?
Cronehood,
Crown Hood, sure.
yeah. Um, and there are some things I always like to float things out at conferences and then add more things to it. And so I'm looking. I'd like to say it's at the very beginning, but not really. So it's gonna be about a year.
Awesome.
As soon as I keep thinking I'm done, something else shows up. I think the gods like to have fun with me with these, and so think, "Oh, you think you're done? No. Here, try this. Add this." Or someone else will show up in my life. That's the common refrain. Someone shows up, and you're like, "Oh, I guess I'm adding this." Okay.
Well, it becomes better when it's all done. So all that input, it's the universe talking to you. It's a form of divination. I would look at it as.
Those are synchronicities, right?
Yeah, that's my primary form of divination, synchronicities. And it works fairly well. You know, you could even ask out loud what the question is and just pay attention to what's being said around you, and pay attention to things that are repeated in different ways from the mouths of living people, from a television show you up and down on the background while you exercise. Sometimes phrases will repeat themselves, you know, and like synchronicities. That's how I do my divination.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's what I take as a sign that I'm on the right path, when things just keep falling into my lap. Against stuff you hear on the radio, random things people say, um, yeah, stuff like that. And you say, okay, I'm getting positive feedback here. I'm getting all of the information I need. I'm getting all of the direction and prompting I need.
Yeah, that's how I view it too. And on my end, I finished a chapter for an anthology, a paranormal anthology that's coming out,
Oh,
I
great.
think
All
early in
right.
the year. So that one will be out before the Llewellyn thing comes out, even though the Llewellyn thing was done months before this one. And um, I'm I'm not writing anything on Crohn's, but I wrote something on Kronos, and I talked about
Oh,
he's relate, you know, how in old age you begin to realize the gifts of Kronos, that, you know, once you understand what symbolically it is, and, you know, how time, you know, affects the Uranian elements of like creativity and creation and passion and all this other stuff. But Kronos teaches you structure
Mm.
and
mm-hmm.
mastering time, organizing time, doing scheduling and all the other stuff. And you begin, when you become older, to realize the importance of all that, you know, because we're all creative people, and rampant creativity is so much fun and it's great, you know, but it's very chaotic. But once you master time management, even if you're not a time management type of person, your life becomes a great deal better, and you can do a lot more with the time that you have. So I wrote something on that. So we're tuned to the same news in presenting on Cronehood and on Kronos.
And when will that come out again?
Uh,
That's later this year?
Probably in the early in 2024.
Okay.
They said it will come out like really early in the year, and they've been pretty good at predicting when things are going to come out.
I think right now with a lot of things that are happening in the world at large, that Kronos is having a great deal of influence
In
for the
some,
for the better.
yeah, in some respects, I see Kronos is very active in the world that we're living in.
Hmm.
And there was something I wanted to bring up, but I forgot. So as it pops back into my mind, I'll bring it up. Oh, I remember what I wanted to share with both of you, especially with Clio. I put up a Facebook group for now, but I haven't really been very active on it in the Facebook group. But on nature and the environment and things like that.
Oh,
What I did manage to do, and again, I haven't really had an opportunity to share it anywhere, was I put together a interactive storytelling class that incorporates mythology. I do that a lot these days. And I have the Protoyeni, the firstborn of Gaia, who were reptilian,
oh
and the
yes.
ancestors of like Medusa and all these snake people, you know, both human and non-human, that populate Greek mythology. And I have that I married it to some modern UFO mythology about dinosaurs that evolved to like human level, and then when their world started to get destroyed, some of them went underground and some of them went to outer space. So I wove the Greek material with that story to tell like a bigger story, and I created the Junior Superhero League of Tenafly, New Jersey, and kids are superheroes, and they have to prevent these dinosaurs from encouraging us to destroy our planet, you know, so that they can restart everything and come back and make it their planet again. So the kids love it, and I spoke with my council person liaison, so I got the local government involved. So we're talking now. They're sending me materials, you know, educational materials, and later on to talking about making this a thing for Tenafly, New Jersey. So I did follow up on doing a project, like I said, but again, I haven't had a chance to write on it. anywhere. So I just figured I'd share it live here with you now.
Yeah, that's great.
And this is also encompassing the Facebook page as well.
Yeah, I just haven't written anything in the Facebook page. I haven't. I've been sick with a respiratory infection. I think it's just like 6 weeks now.
Oh my gosh.
Yes, and that like drains me a lot. So I do what I need to do. I teach my classes. I do my podcast. But honestly, that's about it. I've been doing for like a month and a half now.
Okay.
So anyway, don't want to leave this on a negative note. So onwards. Today we were going to talk about, and we still have, I think, a little over half an hour. We're going to talk about the Mysteria, the mysteries, and just like we just talked about divination and what our interpretation of divination is. I'd like to hear what you think about Mysteria. Is it important to have mysteries? Why is it important to have mysteries? What are the mysteries to you? And I'll share very quickly. My definition of Mysteria is very fluid. And I'll give you an example that has nothing to do with the occult or mythology or anything. I worked for many years in psychiatric units and outpatient programs, and I used to create programs where people would go back to work or go back to school or basically get back on track, whether they had a mental illness or they had a substance abuse problem or whatever they had. It didn't really matter all that much. And the way I did it was I had them dealing with coping and adaptive skills rather than worrying about vocational skills. So I exposed them to different types of stress as they moved through different positions in the program. And also I played a very ambiguous role. Back when I was doing this, you could smoke in hospitals. So what they would see is that I'm smoking cigarettes, I'm having cups of coffee, and I'm just bullshitting with people. But that isn't what I was doing. But that I didn't want to make decisions for them, because unless they failed and they ran into trouble and had to deal with solving problems and things like that, they're never going to work. So I was just there being me on some level, but monitoring everything and then moving them around when they demonstrated that they could handle a particular level of stress in a particular category. So I had occult information in there to the extent that there were ordeals and realizations, and somebody moved through a sequence of these until they got to the biggest realization. I had the Chinese Taoist concept of Wu Wei, which is effortless effort, and I used that, where again I was just smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee as far as they were concerned, as far as most people were concerned. But again, I was steering the program, and I would catch when they forgot to order bread. So there'd be no sandwiches in the morning, stuff like that. But I wouldn't tell them, because unless they came in the morning and there's no bread, and then how do we recover from no bread? And deal with the stress of that, and find that they could solve the problem by calling up like a local bakery. That's one way you could solve the problem. And I wouldn't walk them through, now let's solve the problem, boys and girls. I would just let them, whatever, and deal with whatever happened. And the realization, I knew that they graduated from the program when they would ask me if I wanted a cup of coffee, like when I'm sitting at the table. And I would say, sure. And then they would say that they realized something, that they've been working for a while now. And that basically I didn't tell them that they can work, because then they'd fight me, that who am I to tell them what they can and can't do? And, they're definitely handicapped. So I wouldn't tell them anything. And it would take them months to come to the point where they started actually working, to realize that they've been working. And if they're working, they might as well get paid for it rather than just volunteering for a program in a hospital. So I would congratulate them at that point and tell them that, basically you graduated the program, because this is the same conversation that everybody would have with me. And then they would do well for the most part. And my success rate was 80% rather than the industry standard, which at the time was 17%.
Wow.
17, like 1-7.
1-7 as opposed to 8-0.
What I find fascinating is that it looks like you're just sitting around having a great time,
Yeah.
which I'm sure you were, but that it's how we heal ourselves and get ourselves to do things with our own motivation internally.
Mhm.
Um,
So
And
I wasn't
yeah,
the great teacher. I wasn't the guy. I wasn't the guide in any visible way that they can see. I was their supervisor in a coffee shop, for instance. I also set up like a copy center, and essentially it was the same thing. Except the copy center, they wouldn't ask me if I wanted copies. They would come upstairs and ask me if I wanted coffee. So that seemed to be a standard thing. But to me, that was the mystery realization. How do you become well in this particular area? And everything I designed, although it was invisible to them going through it, it seemed like just a bunch of random stuff that happened in the coffee shop. But I understood what would happen in each position, what type of stressors it would hit, and so forth. And they moved through at their own rate once they got to show that that type of stress didn't bother them. And the last step I had for them was a supervisor or manager, I forget what I called it. So they had to deal with there being no bread and stuff like that, and deal with the person's stress who didn't order the bread, their stress because they were responsible for everybody, and so on. So to me, initiation is very much like that. And you don't really need a artificial structure like the one I created, that if you're receptive to it, and you pay attention to, like Apollonius said, to synchronicities and things like that, life is the great initiator.
Mhm.
And the same thing, you'll get stuck until you can get past a particular point and repeat it endlessly and have, all sorts of upsets and trials until you don't. And then just like in the coffee shop, it's not that it'll never happen to you again, because it'll continue happening to you, the same type of things, but now you're no longer stressed about them. You can handle them. You don't need to worry about them. And life is the same way. You can gain to a level of understanding and move past it. You'll still get situations like that, but they're no longer something that's going to set you into a negative state of mind or into a self-destructive behavior or something. So those are my beliefs about it. It's that it's something that'll happen to us if we're open to, and we can learn directly from life signals. But it is possible to replicate it and control it, so that if somebody wants to focus on a particular thing or a particular area, they can go in and reach that point with a little bit more structure and supervision. So what do you guys, that's my opinion. What do you guys think of the Mysteria?
I actually think what you just talked about is a common theme since we were talking about popular culture and Mysteria. Um, it's a common theme that comes up in films like Groundhog Day or some version of it, where you think at first, oh gosh, it's horrible, it's a curse, I'm being condemned to repeat something. Well, no, because each time, no matter how many different versions I see of that in different films, the person who is actually going through it has to learn, and they learn through repetition and realizing, okay, well, what if I did this? And let's see what, so the creativity aspect comes out, but it's clear that that's how, as individuals, we learn. And I think one of the best things in the Mysteria that I think is we're given a beautiful opportunity to learn through our mistakes and also through what we find of interest. I don't think what we find of interest is necessarily by accident either. Um, and then when it happens, like, oh, okay, it's what would happen if you had gone down this path. The road less traveled, literally, is the one you end up going. Is like, oh, okay, well, what if you hadn't made that choice? Um, and so the mysteries we get are depending on the choices we make, and the choices we make depend on how we feel and what we see. And I think that your description of where you were with that particular program on the coffee shop was a really beautiful one, and probably a really great way of describing how the mysteries work in our lives, just in general.
Thank you.
You know, I was sitting here wondering, and they paid you for this.
Yeah, they pay me. I've had a lot of interesting jobs. Like right now, my job is using mythological stories to bring kids into mythology and to bring older people into mythology, less frequently now since the pandemic. But I used to have, they're not really classes. I guess you can call them like the fantasy role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons, but they're really not.
Mhm.
But it's a way for kids to and adults to put themselves into the story of Greek mythology and to make decisions that are out of the box for us, because we're not going to make decisions in because we don't live in the universe of the Greek gods as portrayed in the myths, but putting yourself there and acting as if, and then becoming part of the story. Like I've done the story of Jason and the Argonauts at least a dozen times, and each time's taken to 2 years or more. So they really spent the amount of time that Jason and his crew took to get there, to get to where they had the fleece, and they started to come back and deal with the after adventures. And I've woven that in with the Gigantomachia, the giant battle happened in Greek mythology. So the kids experience this as part of the story rather than just listening or watching what happened in the story. And I remember when we had a store in Pennsylvania, some of the kids at that point had become adults and they had families of their own, and they used to come to the store and they used to talk about how they were part of Jason's crew, as adults. So these stories stay with them, and the experience stays with them also. So we've had everything from Egyptians to Arcadian werewolves, depending on the bunch of kids you have together. They're going to want to be different characters, but all sorts of people wind up on the Argo at any given point in time. And once they learn the simple rules I created, they would do these things at home. So they'd have future adventures, and they go into the underworld of Hades, and they go to Mount Olympus, and so they would eventually weave their own mythologies and find experiences in there. So that's a cool thing. I mean, I'm not doing it full time, but I'm doing it, because partially I'm in my 60s and I'm not as mobile or as motivated with energy as I once was. So this is something I could do without that much physical and mental pressure. But I find this very fulfilling, and I get to play with mythology with other people, and I know that these stories that they help tell, because we're all telling the story together, and I'm still doing the equivalent of smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee, although I'm not doing either, but I'm just kind of there. My role is just moderating and guiding the story. But it's the same role basically. I'm there not to interfere with what they're experiencing, but just to help invisibly guide it along the way.
I think that's a beautiful way of looking at the mysteries you were asking. And your original question was about what we thought of the Mysteria, um, how they present. And as we're having this discussion, I'm thinking of so many events in life, um, both within a traditional sense, um, religious traditions, spiritual traditions, where we have things on a cycle, things that go on a loop of some sort, time-wise, and the idea that we each pass around, we learn something. So we have our traditions. For example, we celebrate 3 types of New Year's in our, so some may say, oh yes, you're Wiccan, so you have Samhain, and some consider Samhain the New Year. And in my home tradition, it's actually what's coming up for Yule, because that's when the start of the light half of the year is. And for many people, there's a secular New Year, but each time we have, almost as a species, this common need to say, okay, what have we gained? What have we learned? What are we tossing aside? What are we wanting to have out for our next time around, whatever path this is? And that is one of the biggest mysteries, I think, in life itself is a mystery. Life is probably the ultimate of the Mysteria, and we have the fun opportunity to explore the labyrinth that we call life, and as not just a mystery to learn, but also in your role as a mentor to be there for others, when you get to see people light up with, oh yeah, I got it, and it goes remind you of when you got it the first time or the 10th time. And some things we're a bit stubborn on. So I like to think of the Mysteria at its heart are things that we need to have in our lives in order to help our evolution progress as individuals and as a species as a whole.
Thank you.
We just happen to have it in so many things, including our mythologies, our literature, our language, our cultural um, items, pop culture, since that was mentioned tonight.
Yeah, and pop culture has made mythology global through like the Marvel movies and Star Trek and you name it. There are smaller shared universes that people can plug into through the movie screen or the TV. And now that they have the whole universe thing, uh, focal to a lot of these creative efforts, the different stories tie together, not always well, just like in the myths don't in Greece don't fit together very well a lot of times either. How
It's
about
always a jagged edge. But
yeah,
actually, I just thought of something. You mentioned that. I don't know if either of you remember the end of the original Men in Black movie, the very first one, where they're in a I think it's the first one. Yeah, there's a locker, and the guy opens the locker, and all of a sudden, whoops, you realize it's a room, but it's not a locker in a locker room. You're actually in a train station. This is the idea that we're just a very small part of not just another world. And then I think it's we end up being like universes and galaxies in someone's bag of marbles, literally. Um, do you remember? I see it head nod. Yes. All I can think of is that's a wonderful visual way to think of the Mysteria.
Mm.
That is a common, and they have sort of at the end, she's like, oh, it's great, and it's just an awareness in the film. But I thought whoever did that was a genius.
yes, and you laid a foundation of stuff. We're not going to talk about it today because we only have like 10 more minutes, but you laid a foundation that we could revisit next time. And Apollonius, how about you in the Mysteria?
Well, yeah, I don't, those are really great observations. And I think, um, one of the things that occurs to me is, as I think you both said, that, a lot of times we just get this stuff out of living, and it's different people have observed, that somebody will have a bad accident or they'll have a near fatal disease or something like that, a brush with death, and it totally changes their perspective on life, um, reorients all of their priorities and so forth, and makes them appreciate life more. And you say, well, you know, wouldn't it be nice if you could have that psychological transformation without having to have a bad accident or a near fatal disease or something else awful? And to my mind, the mysteries, and I'm thinking here a little more narrowly of like the ancient mysteries, like the Eleusinian and the Bacchic mysteries and so forth, was partly partly trying to do that. It was trying to make you live this life better by reorienting you psychologically. And I think this is why it had to go through stages. And I mean, traditionally you had a stage of purification and a stage of illumination or enlightenment, where some sort of doctrines were transmitted to you, and then the final stage was some sort of that was where the actual psychological transformation took place. That you experienced something, and that experience psychologically transformed you. Um, that could be because it was a very frightening experience from which you were saved in some way, or it could be some other sort of awe-inspiring experience. But it's something that really cannot be done just by talking. The Eleusinian mysteries, there were things said, but there were things done. And um, so I think, those stages are in some sense necessary if you want to formalize the process, if you want to try and engineer it so that you don't have to wait for something bad to happen, for example. And so there's this purification, a kind of emptying, an abandonment of preconceived ideas and perspectives and attitudes. And then there's a stage of sort of illumination. And I think that comes sometimes when you see others that have already been through the process. And essentially that validates. You say, oh, they seem to be pretty happy. They seem to be kind of squared away, whatever. And maybe this is part of what you're doing by sitting there drinking your coffee. You're sort of um, you're the one in the room that kind of is not getting stressed out and has everything seemingly under control. And and then that prepares you. It's, you know, it's a lot of it's about set and setting. The revelation coming in the mysteries prepares you mentally, intellectually to some degree, emotionally, and then there's the actual transformation, which is something that has to be experienced. And and you know, if it all works, you're initiated into a new stage of life. Maybe not a new stage in terms of like a rite of passage, but a new stage in that you now live life differently. And
Mhm.
we know that certainly from the Eleusinian mysteries, you know, people just spoke about how it had totally transformed their life, usually with respect to their fear of death, but, you know, that basically it had totally transformed their life. So it was a very profound experience happening, you know, over a short period of time. So it's not, I think that's what makes it an initiation as opposed to just learning, you know.
Mhm.
And it's there's many ways of doing it now. I mean, I think, you know, sometimes we do it now with various forms of psychotherapy. Um, the you know, because we don't really have, except in the pagan community and in the magical community, we really don't have mysteries, I think, in the ancient sense, uh, organized mysteries. Um, but so and that's a lack, I think, in our culture. You know, I
Mhm.
think that's why so many people are disoriented. You know, Jung talked about the importance of midlife. You know,
Mhm.
and he viewed, again, like you were saying, Cleo, life as a cycle. You know,
Mhm.
so we're born, and the first half of the cycle is about materialization and manifestation. We're a soul coming into a body, and we're getting uh, effective in the world. You know, we're learning how to feed ourselves. We learning how to get a job, um, get married, perhaps have a family, perhaps have a household. All of these sorts of things which are embodying us as living animals on the earth. Um, but then in the second half of life, you know, uh, which is not a magic number, but wherever the second half of life is, he said it was natural then because now we're on the other side of the cycle. We're going from fully materialized to where we're dematerialized, where we're disincarnated. And he says, so it's very natural in the second half of life then to begin focusing on spiritual issues,
Mhm.
and which people often do. But this is the one of the key things is the one of the causes of midlife crises is people that have invested everything into the first half of the cycle and then have no way of transferring to the second half of the cycle. They have, and we have no formal initiations for that. So they're just kind of left on their own. And so they flounder around psychologically, trying to essentially um, deal with the fact that they're in the second half of life and they're on the way out, you know, and
Mhm.
sooner or later. Um, so I think, you know, that especially in that midlife transition and in the second half of life is where these initiations become especially important. Now, you know, certainly, you know, coming of age initiations are important, but that's part of the first half. And we don't do very well on those either. Um, but and then cronehood, of course, on in the second half, you know, is again a very, very important initiation. And our culture on the whole doesn't do these things at all. So
Mhm.
that leaves people adrift, you know, dealing with it on their own, which if you have a religious tradition or a spiritual tradition, or some things to build on, you can do it on your own. But many people don't nowadays. You know, they don't have anything that's useful for them in that respect. So I think that's, you know, it's for, you know, dealing with some of these major life transitions in particular that help you live whatever stage of life you're in or whatever circumstances you're in better, you know. And I think that's what the ancient mysteries did in many cases. They were in many cases suited to ancient culture, and I think we need different mysteries now. We're in a different culture, uh, and that doesn't mean we can't build on the old mythologies, because those mythologies reflect structures in our psyches, and they
Yes.
change.
And actually, with our societal structures now, um, I think the things that are becoming popular, for example, there's not a renaissance even, but a popularity of things dealing with aging or menopause, or um, when you talked about people not doing well with coming of age, I'm thinking of the opposite, where people are now in having parties and celebrations to embrace things that it used to be not necessarily, people weren't proud of having it, but the idea of releasing and letting go. And when you spoke about that, I was thinking actually the Tibetan Book of the Dead, of ways of having a good death, and those things that we learn, we are not taught them, unless, again, as you said, you're in a pagan tradition or a magical tradition. And sometimes I think that there are plenty of people who might know, but those who would have taught them are no longer here, or their old ways are pushed aside. And these are not exactly welcomed, or haven't been welcomed until very, very recently in our contemporary society.
Right.
It's youth has been everything, if you can't be young, what was that thing about not trusting anybody over 30?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
I remember that.
I remember being as a kid and hearing that expression and going, what do they mean? But then, how we perceive time, which goes back to what you were talking about, um, Hercules, about chronos and time and the perceptions of time. And the happiest people, by the way, are those who are older. I mean, if I can manage it health wise, I'd love to get to 100, because the happiest people are the people who are like, screw you. They're in their 80s, 90s, and hundreds or later. And they seem to be the happiest people overall in comparison to all the drama stuff that's gone through.
Well, you
Yeah,
realize
I
as you
agree.
get older that a lot of what you're living isn't really you. Yeah, it's not what you want to do or who you are. It's what the roles that have been conditioned into you by your society, by your religion, by your government, by whatever. And for me, with midlife, it was, okay, I'm succeeding at these things. I have professions. I've taught in college. I've been a therapist. I was a program designer for psychiatric rehabilitation, doing all these things. And it's like, not that I didn't enjoy that, not that I didn't learn from it, not that it wasn't a profound experience, but it wasn't who I am. And you get a sense of who you are, and you want to see, as Apollonius called it, the road not taken. What happens if I take these roads? And I've always found, since doing that even if the road ultimately doesn't lead anywhere, or it's not as fulfilling as I imagined it would be, or it's not what I imagined it would be, I feel better now that I've at least experimented with trying to attain it. And some of the things are like not really of importance to anybody else. Like when I was actually, let me cut it because we only have a few minutes. So to be continued. Uh, and all of us, we've just scratched the surface of these introductory topics. So I'm looking forward next time to continuing this conversation. Apollonius, you are a wealth of information and wisdom. Where can people go to find your books, to follow your speeches, and to get more into the life that you're opening up for us?
Well, the best place is my website, opsopaeus.com, opsopaeus.com, or wisdomofhypatia.com. And I'm also on Facebook, John Opsopaeus. Um, so, and you can email me through those websites.
Thank you very much. And Clio, you're new to our company, but you're very wise, and you represent a very unique perspective that opens up new doors to understanding. How can people enter your world?
Well, I am on Facebook as Clio Ajana, and you can certainly friend me there. message me there. I still write for the Wild Hunt every month, and you can contact me through there, and let's chat. It'll be great.
It's 9 o'clock.
Awesome. And for both of you, if you want to promote anything that you're doing, please feel free to post it on either one of my Facebook accounts. All in all, that's around like 6,000 people or something. So I don't know how many of the people will respond or follow the path offered to them, but at least they'll know about this. So thank you so very much. You're both awesome, and I'm blessed to have you here in this forum once a month to hold these conversations, and that you're sharing all your wisdom with the world. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.